everyone, and welcome to the Bystander Intervention Training. My name is Olivia Oropesa, and I'm the Community Prevention Manager with the Victim Service Center of Central Florida, also known as the VSC. The VSC is the Certified Rape Crisis Center for Seminole, Osceola, and Orange counties, and our mission is to provide free and confidential services to survivors of sexual assault, violent crime, and traumatic circumstances. Today, we're going to be learning about a really important topic, how we as bystanders can safely and effectively intervene to prevent harm, support others, and create safer communities for everyone. We'll cover key concepts like recognizing red flags, understanding consent, and practicing the 5 Ds of bystander intervention. By the end of this training, you'll have the tools and knowledge to make a difference when it matters most. I also want to mention that this training will touch on some sensitive topics like harassment and violence. If at any time you feel uncomfortable or you need to talk or take a break, please feel free to step away and talk to someone you trust. Remember, the VSC is also here to help. If you or someone you know ever needs support, you can call our 24/7 helpline at 407-500-HEAL. That's 407-500-4325. We're here to listen, support, and connect you with resources. With that being said, let's get started. So before we dive into the training, I'd like you to go and take the pre-training survey available in your course contents. This step is really important. It helps us understand what you already know about bystander intervention and helps us measure what you learn and gain from this training. Your response also helps us improve future sessions, so we really appreciate your participation. Once you're done with the survey, come back to the lecture, hit play, and we'll get started with more of the content. So I want to take a moment to tell you more about the Victim Service Center of Central Florida, or the VSC. At VSC, our mission is to provide individualized services and resources to victims of sexual assault, violent crime, and traumatic circumstances. We do this through crisis intervention, therapy, advocacy, and community education. Our vision is to create a safer community that is more resilient and compassionate, a place where everyone has access to the support they need to heal and thrive. We offer a variety of services, all completely free and confidential, including the 24/7 crisis helpline, advocacy services, therapy, support groups, and forensic exams provided by our specially trained SANE nurses. The VSC is also a fantastic place to get involved. We offer volunteer and internship opportunities for those who are passionate about helping others and making a difference. Lastly, I want to emphasize why VSC is qualified to provide this training. We have years of experience supporting survivors, educating the public, and advocating for safer communities. We bring not only that expertise, but also a deep commitment to creating positive change. We're here to help empower you with the knowledge and tools so you can make a difference too and become the VSC champion of change. So let's move on and start exploring ways that you can become an active bystander. First, let's break down a couple of key terms that are central to understanding today's training. First, we'll talk about bystanders. A bystander is a person who is present at an event that's taking place, but that individual isn't directly involved. This means you could be a bystander if you witness something like bullying, harassment, or even something that leads up to a crime like sexual assault. Bystanders have the unique power to either step up and make a difference or remain passive and let the situation escalate. Next, the bystander effect. This is a social psychological phenomenon that explains why people are less likely to take action when there are more people around them. Essentially, the more people there are, the less responsible any one individual feels to intervene. Psychologists coined this term diffusion of responsibility in 1968 to describe this idea. It's why sometimes we see situations where no one steps in to help. It's not that people don't care, but they assume someone else will act. That's where bystander intervention comes in. The goal of this training is to help you move from being a passive bystander to an active one. An active bystander feels confident in their ability to intervene when something is wrong. Whether it's speaking up to stop harassment, supporting a friend in an unsafe situation, or confronting harmful behaviors in your community, bystander intervention empowers you to take action. To bring this concept to life, I'd like you to pause here and watch a short YouTube video that explains the bystander effect in action. You can find the video linked in your course materials. When you're done, come back and we'll keep going. So, to help you better understand the bystander effect, let's look at some real-world examples where it played a significant role. These stories are tragic, but they illustrate the importance of becoming an active bystander and how critical it is to act when someone else is in need. First, Kitty Genovese. In 1964, Kitty was brutally attacked just steps from her apartment door in New York City. Despite 38 people reportedly hearing or seeing parts of the attack, no one intervened. This case brought attention to the bystander effect and the concept of diffusion of responsibility. Next, Cassine Morris. Cassine was only 16 years old when he was attacked and killed by a group of teenage boys outside of a mall. Over 50 other teenagers stood by, some even filmed the incident, but no one stepped in to help. Another example is James Bulger. James was only 2 years old when he was abducted and murdered by two 10-year-old boys in Liverpool, England. Many people saw James with the boys, but no one intervened or called for help, assuming it was just kids misbehaving. Lastly, Hugo Alfredo Tail Yax. Hugo was a homeless man in New York City who was selflessly intervened to help a woman who was being attacked. Tragically, he was stabbed by the attacker and left bleeding on the sidewalk for over an hour while nearly 24 people walked by without assisting or calling for help. These stories highlight how hesitation or inaction in critical moments can have devastating consequences. They also remind us of the power we have to make a difference if we choose to act. Take a moment to think about these examples. How might these situations have been different if someone stepped in to help? What could you have done if you were there? Let's talk about how common violence and bullying are in our world today. These issues affect anyone, but certain groups face higher risks because of societal attitudes, systemic inequalities, and barriers to support. As bystanders, we have the power to step in, speak up, and help stop harassment, bullying, and assault. But first, we need to understand just how widespread these issues are and why some groups might be more vulnerable than others. Here are some key statistics. Nearly half of all 7th graders surveyed reported being sexually harassed, either physically or verbally, in just the past 6 months. This shows us how early these harmful behaviors can start and how important it is to address them quickly. Next, over half of women and nearly 1 in 3 men will experience sexual violence involving physical contact at some point in their lives. For women, this is often linked to bigger issues like gender inequality, which creates unfair power dynamics and harmful expectations of women. Also, women with disabilities are 3 times more likely to be physically abused or assaulted than those without disabilities. Why is this? People with disabilities often deal with extra barriers in society, reliance on caregivers, and stereotypes that may lead them to a situation where they are treated unfairly, where their voices might be ignored, and it makes it harder for them to report or escape the violence. The LGBTQ community also faces higher instances of violence. LGBTQ people aged 16 and older experience nearly 4 times more rates of violence victimization compared to their non-LGBTQ peers. This is largely because of homophobia, transphobia, and stigma, which contributes to rates of harassment, discrimination, and even physical violence. Additionally, nearly half of U.S. teens report experiencing at least one form of cyberbullying. Online spaces, while meant to connect us, often become the platforms for harassment, especially for marginalized groups. And lastly, nationwide, 20% of students in their adolescence experience bullying, over half of which involve some form of cyberbullying. And marginalized students, such as those from racial, ethnic, or gender minorities, are often targeted more frequently because of prejudice or stereotypes. These numbers not only highlight the prevalence of violence and bullying, but also the systemic factors and social factors that make certain groups more vulnerable. For example, societal biases, the way society chooses to look at certain groups, can embolden perpetrators and create environments where violence or harassment feel excusable or even normalized. As we move forward, I encourage you to reflect on how these factors show up in your school, in your community, or in your online spaces, and think about the unique role you might play in standing up for those who may not feel empowered to stand up for themselves. In the same line of thought, I want to show you guys the wheel of power and privilege. This tool helps us understand why certain groups face greater risks of violence, harassment, and bullying from others. The wheel is divided into sections representing different aspects of identity, such as race, gender, sexual orientation, ability, age, and more. At the center are identities that tend to hold the most power and privilege in society: For example, being white, male, straight, cisgender, able-bodied, and middle or upper class. These identities are often treated as the norm, and people who fit into these categories typically experience fewer barriers or risks. That's not to say they can't become a victim. Anyone can become a victim of sexual violence or violent crime, but there's a higher likelihood for individuals who don't hold some of those identity characteristics. As you move outward on the wheel, you'll see identities that are more marginalized, those that are often excluded, discriminated against, or overlooked. These individuals tend to face greater risks of violence, harassment, bullying, precisely because of societal biases and systemic inequalities. So why does this matter for bystander intervention? Well, if you're someone who holds more power or privilege, you may be in a unique position to step in and help. People in marginalized groups face additional challenges when standing up for themselves, whether it's fear of retaliation, lack of support, or being dismissed when they speak out. Take a moment to reflect on your own place on the wheel. What characteristics do you have that might give you more power or privilege in society? How can you use that power and privilege for others who may not feel safe or supported to intervene on their own? The wheel of power and privilege reminds us that while we all experience challenges, some of us have a greater ability and responsibility to create safer and more inclusive spaces for everyone. So let's talk about gender-based violence, which is a portion of what we were talking about with the wheel of power and privilege. Gender-based violence is a violence directed at an individual based on their gender. It's deeply rooted in harmful societal norms and attitudes that dictate how people should behave based on their gender. These norms often place men in positions of power or control, while women and other marginalized genders are expected to be submissive or passive. This imbalance leads to various forms of violence, including domestic abuse, sexual assault, and harassment. For example, in many cultures, there's a harmful belief that men have the right to control women, leading to practices like child marriage or other harmful practices against women. These practices are justified by the idea that women should be submissive and that their value is tied to their sexuality, purity, or ability to bear children. Additionally, gender-based violence disproportionately affects marginalized communities. For instance, LGBTQ individuals face higher rates of violence. Similarly, women of color may experience unique forms of violence that intersect with both racism and sexism, making it harder for them to seek help or be believed. Addressing gender-based violence requires challenging these harmful norms and attitudes. This involves promoting gender equality, educating communities about healthy relationships and consent, ensuring that laws protect all individuals regardless of their gender identity. On one end of the spectrum, traditional gender norms also might suggest for men that they must be strong, dominant, unemotional, invulnerable. These stereotypes additionally pressure men to suppress their feelings, act aggressively, or dismiss the importance of consent. These rigid norms don't just hurt individuals, they sustain a culture where violence and inequality persists. By challenging these norms and supporting people across the gender spectrum, we create safer spaces and reduce harm for everyone. This brings me to our next topic, rape culture, which reinforces these harmful beliefs on a societal level. So rape culture refers to a set of attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors that normalize or trivialize sexual violence. It creates an environment where sexual assault is excused, overlooked, or even justified. At its core, rape culture perpetuates harmful ideas about consent, victimization, and gender-based violence. One major aspect of rape culture is victim blaming. This happens when a society or individuals place the blame on a victim instead of the attacker or perpetrator. For instance, if someone says, "She shouldn't have been out that late," or "He should have done more to stop it," they're ignoring the responsibility of the person committing the violence and unfairly shifting the blame onto the victim. Another key aspect of rape culture is gender-based violence, which we touched on in the previous slide. It includes the violence and harm that disproportionately affects individuals based on their gender. Lastly, rape culture perpetuates harmful beliefs about consent. A common misconception about consent is that possibly silence or someone being passive means that they're consenting, or that a no doesn't always mean no. In reality, consent should always be active, enthusiastic, and clear. The belief that someone has to physically resist or fight back for it to be considered assault is dangerous and a myth that reinforces rape culture. As we talk about rape culture, take a minute to reflect on your own beliefs and behaviors. Are there moments when you've seen this harmful pattern in your communities, coming up in others, affecting someone else's route to justice? Recognizing these patterns in ourselves is the first step towards breaking them and creating more respectful and accountable cultures around us. So, in that same note, it's important that we learn to check our own biases. A bias is something that we all have, but it's important to understand the difference between explicit and implicit bias and how it can affect victims of crime. By recognizing our own biases, we challenge them and make sure they don't impact how we treat others. Explicit bias is a type of bias that you're aware of. It's when you consciously hold a belief or attitude towards a person or a group. For example, you may have a prejudice against a specific race or gender, and you know it. This is a bias you can openly recognize and change. An example of an explicit bias might be a student saying, "I don't trust people from this neighborhood." They're consciously aware of that prejudiced belief about that community. Implicit bias, on the other hand, refers to biases we are unaware of. These biases are automatic judgments or stereotypes we carry about other people based on things like their race, their gender, their sexual orientation, even though we don't actively choose to uphold them. For example, let's say when someone is hiring for a group project, a student automatically assumes a female classmate is better suited for organizing the team, while a male classmate is better suited for leading the team, even though they haven't really considered each individual's personal strengths and weaknesses or abilities and interests. It's assuming, based off of their gender, that they'll behave one way or the other. Why are these unchecked biases so harmful? Unchecked biases are dangerous because they influence our decisions, our interactions with others, and our behaviors in ways that we may not even notice. They can lead to unfair treatment of others, like unintentionally giving someone less opportunity or respect based on something like their gender or race. Unchecked bias can contribute to larger systemic problems such as discrimination in school, work, or the legal system. When biases are left unchecked, they perpetuate inequality and create an environment where people feel unsafe, excluded, or unsupported. In the context of consent and bystander intervention, implicit and explicit biases can influence whether or not we choose to intervene and help someone who needs it. Consider your own biases, whether they are explicit or implicit. Think about situations where you may have unintentionally acted on some sort of bias. What are some of the steps you can take to become more aware of your biases? So now I'm going to be talking to you about the spectrum of violence. Sexual violence isn't just about rape. There's a spectrum of behaviors that contribute to a culture where violence happens more easily, and that's why it's important we look at all of the behaviors on a continuum. Smaller, less obvious actions may seem harmless to some, but they lay the groundwork for more serious forms of violence. When we ignore or normalize these behaviors on the left-hand side of the spectrum, we're making it harder to see the bigger issue, and it will be more likely for those harmful acts on the right end of the spectrum to take place. Examples of behaviors of violence on the spectrum are things like catcalling. This is when you make an inappropriate or sexually suggestive comment, whistling, shouting at someone in a way that makes someone feel unsafe or uncomfortable. Right? The difference between a compliment and catcalling or harassment is a compliment is something you would say to a friend or possibly a family member, something that makes someone else feel good. It's not about a power dynamic like catcalling is. Sending unsolicited sexual pictures or messages is also a form of violence. Sending pictures or messages of a sexual nature without the other person's consent, especially when they have not asked for them, can be extremely distressing and harmful. Other examples of violence on this spectrum are touching someone without their consent, something like slapping someone on the butt or groping someone while walking past them in a crowded space, possibly begging for a date after being rejected and harassing someone, pressuring or manipulating someone, such as using guilt or manipulation to make someone change their mind or engage in an activity that they don't want to. These actions may seem small or like just jokes or normal behavior, but they create an environment where the idea of consent gets blurred and disrespect towards others becomes normalized. It's important to recognize that this spectrum isn't just a collection of isolated behaviors. The more we accept them, the easier it becomes for more serious forms of sexual violence, like rape, to occur. In a college environment, especially with parties, gatherings, social events, you might see or experience some of these behaviors from others. It's important to understand that even something that seems small can be a serious form of harassment or violence. As bystanders, we need to speak up against the behaviors on the right side of the spectrum and the left side of the spectrum. Please go ahead and pause the video lecture now and watch the next YouTube video in your course content that's going to show you some examples from the spectrum of sexual violence. Pay attention to how these small behaviors can contribute to a larger pattern of disrespect and harm, and I'll be back here for you when you're done. So I want to ask you, why do you think people don't step up in dangerous or uncomfortable situations? What stops bystanders from being heroes? There are a lot of reasons why people don't intervene in certain situations. Some might seem like excuses, but it's important to understand that many of these reasons are deeply ingrained into how we think and act in social situations. That's why it's called a social psychological phenomenon. Take a moment to think about some of these questions. Maybe people are afraid of retaliation. Is it because they think somebody else will step in? Do they feel unsure of what to do or what to say? Are they uncomfortable or unsure if the situation is bad enough to intervene? Is the situation really calling for a hero? Could they fear being judged or ostracized by others for speaking out and standing up for what they think is right? These are a few examples of what might stop someone from stepping up. Sometimes it's about feeling uncertain. Sometimes it's about fearing they could make a situation worse. Or sometimes people simply do not know what to do. Take a second to reflect on these reasons why bystanders may not take action. As we move forward, we'll explore ways to overcome these barriers and empower you to stand up and speak up when it matters most. Sometimes being a hero isn't about doing something dramatic or life-changing. Sometimes it's about recognizing when something just doesn't feel right and taking action in that moment. As we move forward, you'll learn more about specific ways to intervene safely, but first, let's talk about why it's important to recognize when someone is in danger and when your choices matter. Learning to spot these moments is an essential skill that can make a huge difference. You may not always be able to intervene in the same way, but every action matters. Here are some simple yet powerful ways you can intervene in situations that you might be unsure about, whether they call for a hero. You may give someone a disapproving look when someone else is being disrespected or made fun of, or an inappropriate comment is made. You might interrupt or distract a conversation or behavior that feels uncomfortable or harmful. Maybe asking, "Did you see the game last night?" You could not laugh when someone else around you says a sexist, racist, or violent joke. You could talk to a friend about their behavior if it's a problem in a non-confrontational way. You can care for a friend who's experienced problematic behavior, even if you don't know what exactly to say. You can ask for help from friends, staff, police, anyone with authority if the situation has gone beyond something that you can handle. Remember that sometimes being an active bystander just means recognizing when something doesn't feel right and choosing to do something about it. Take a moment to pause the lecture and watch our next YouTube video. In this video, you'll see what happens when someone does step in situations like catcalling, coercive control, and unwanted groping in a bar. Pay attention to how these small acts have big impacts in everyone's lives and possibly in the culture around them. I'll be back here for you when you're done and you can come and return to the lecture. As you become more aware of the situations around you, it's important to learn to recognize the signs that someone might need help. We call these red flags, signals that something isn't right and could potentially lead to harm. Let's go over some of the common red flags you might notice. Verbal aggression. This could be yelling, name-calling, or threats. When someone raises their voice in anger or uses hurtful language, it's a red flag that the situation may be escalating or getting out of hand. Physical intimidation. This could be behaviors like pushing, cornering, unwanted touching. If you see someone being physically controlled or intimidated, it's a clear sign that they may be in danger or feeling threatened. If you notice someone looking upset, scared, or uncomfortable in a situation, that's a strong indicator they may not feel safe. Emotional distress could show up through their body language, their tone of voice, or their facial expressions. And online harassment. Harassment is not just limited to face-to-face interactions. It can also happen in our digital spaces. If you see mean or inappropriate comments online, or someone is being targeted or bullied in a group chat, that's another red flag that something harmful is happening. Remember that red flags can show up in many different ways, and being able to spot them gives you the opportunity to step in and help and be a hero. It might feel uncomfortable to notice these situations, but recognizing them is the first step to knowing when to act and helping someone who needs it. So before we get started with the 5 Ds of bystander intervention, we should talk about our ABCs. So before you jump into action, it's important that you can assess the situation carefully and correctly. So first, A, assess for safety. The first thing you want to do is assess the situation and ask yourself, is someone being hurt or bullied? Does the situation seem to be escalating? You want to make sure you're not stepping into a situation that could put you at risk. Your personal safety has to come first. If things seem dangerous, don't hesitate to call for help instead of intervening directly. Be in a group for B. If it's safe to do so, gather a group of friends or other people around you. There's strength in numbers, and sometimes it helps to have others with you. If you're alone or if it doesn't feel safe to intervene directly, seek help from a teacher, an adult, or someone with authority who can take charge. C, care for the victim. If it seems appropriate, talk to the person you think might need help. Ask them if they're okay. Sometimes all someone needs is to know somebody else cares. Even if they don't want to talk right away, letting them know you see them and that you care can make all the difference. If a situation seems serious, you may want to follow up with a trusted adult or assist them in seeking professional help. These steps are important because they help you stay safe, support others, and act wisely. Not every situation calls for direct confrontation, but every instance does call for an assessment to assess for safety, try to gather support, and offer care. That's going to put you on the right track to being a hero. So with that being said, let's move on to our 5 Ds of bystander intervention. So these are strategies that you can use when you recognize someone might be in trouble. The most important thing is to remember that your safety comes first. You want to make sure that whatever action you take won't put you or the other person in more danger. Here's how you can intervene. D for direct. Sometimes the best thing you can do is step in directly. This means addressing the situation head on, either by speaking up or physically stepping in. If you witness a situation where someone is being harassed, you could say something like, "Hey, that's not okay," or "Stop, that's inappropriate." Directly addressing harmful behaviors makes it clear it will not be tolerated. For example, if someone is making unwanted advances towards a classmate at a party, stepping in and saying, "You need to back off, they said no," can help stop the situation before it escalates. D for delegate. Not everyone feels comfortable stepping in directly, and that's okay. Sometimes the best way to intervene is to delegate it to someone else. This means reaching out to someone who can help, like a teacher, coach, trusted adult, authority figure. For example, if you see bullying happen in the hallway between classes and you don't feel safe intervening, you can grab a teacher or ask another student to report it to a school counselor. D for distract. If you feel like intervening directly might escalate things or make the situation worse, try distracting people involved. This could mean interrupting the situation to draw attention from the incident. For example, if you're at a social gathering and see someone being harassed, you could walk over and ask if they need help with something, like, "Hey, I think I left my jacket in the other room. Want to come with me?" This draws the person away from being harassed and out of the situation without directly confronting the perpetrator. D for document. You can't safely intervene in the moment, but you can document the event as much as possible. This means recording what's happening or writing down important details such as what was said, what occurred, and who was involved. For example, if you're at a protest or event or party and witness someone being harassed but can't get involved right away, record what you saw. Report it to the authorities or event organizers afterwards. This documentation can be vital for any investigation that follows up. Importantly, prioritize the victim's safety and privacy. Make sure you only document or record what's happening to help with an investigation or to help them get justice. D for delay. If you didn't intervene during the accident or during the incident, it's not too late to help. Delaying your intervention means offering support to the person affected after the fact. For example, if you see someone getting embarrassed or bullied in class but didn't feel safe speaking up in that moment, you can approach them afterward and say something like, "Hey, I saw what happened earlier. Are you okay? If you need someone to talk to or help reporting it, I'm here for you." These 5 strategies, direct, delegate, distract, document, and delay, are all ways you can intervene that prioritize safety while also supporting those who need help. Now let's go into more detail on how these actions can look in real-life situations and when you might need to use each options. Take a moment to pause the lecture and complete the practice activity for the 5 Ds of bystander intervention. They will look something like this, with an example scenario and with you to choose which D is best for intervening in that situation and give an example. When you're done, come back here because next we'll dive into a conversation about boundaries and consent, a critical piece in fostering respectful and safe interactions. Welcome back. Let's dive into a topic that's at the heart of all healthy relationships and interactions, boundaries. Boundaries are the personal rules we set for ourselves and what makes us feel comfortable about how we should be treated. They help us protect our well-being and show respect for others. Here are some types of boundaries to consider. Physical boundaries. These involve what kinds of physical contact you're comfortable with, whether it's hugs, handshakes, or the amount of personal space you prefer between you and someone else. These all count as physical boundaries. In romantic or sexual relationships, physical boundaries also include what types of intimacy you're comfortable with. For example, you might want to take things slow and check in with your partner and make sure you're both comfortable. Asking questions like, is this okay? How does this feel for you? Isn't just respectful, it's attractive and it shows you care. Next is emotional boundaries. Emotional boundaries relate to how much you're ready to share about your feelings and what kinds of emotional support you're comfortable receiving. In romantic relationships, this might mean being clear about what you're ready to talk about or when you need space to process your emotions. Respecting emotional boundaries helps build trust and ensures that both people feel safe and understood. Digital boundaries. These involve what you're okay sharing online, who can follow or message you, whether your account is public or private, and how quickly you feel comfortable responding to people's text or direct messages. For example, some people might feel fine sharing their location and passwords with their partners, while others may prefer more privacy. Next is material boundaries. This includes how you share physical items like your class notes, snack, laptop, phone charger, and whether you're comfortable lending out these possessions to others. Setting and communicating boundaries isn't always easy, especially in a romantic or sexual context, where people may sometimes worry about coming across as awkward or overly cautious. But here's the thing. Expressing boundaries, like asking if something is okay or talking about what makes you comfortable, actually deepens trust and connection. People value partners who care enough to check in and work to ensure that both people are on the same page. One of the biggest misconceptions about boundaries is that they're about saying no or shutting others out. In reality, boundaries are about creating space for healthy, respectful, and enjoyable interactions that feel good for everyone involved. Take a moment to think about boundaries you've already set in your life: physical, emotional, digital, even material, and reflect on whether or not they're working for you. Ask yourself, do I feel comfortable with the way I've created my boundaries? Am I respectful of the boundaries of others? What steps can I do to ensure that my relationships and friendships are built on mutual respect and understanding? When you approach boundaries as tools for creating healthier, happier relationships, they become empowering, not limiting. Now that we've talked about boundaries, let's take it a step further with consent. Consent is asking for and receiving clear permission before doing something that involves someone else. It's rooted in mutual respect and ensures that everyone feels safe, comfortable, and valued. While consent applies to many areas of life, like borrowing someone's belongings or giving someone a hug, it's especially important in romantic and sexual relationships. One way to remember what consent looks like is by using the acronym FRIES, which you can see on the screen is developed by Planned Parenthood. So we're going to break FRIES down together. F is for freely given. Consent is a choice that it has to be made without pressure, manipulation, or fear. If someone feels coerced or obligated to do so, it's not true consent. For example, agreeing to something just because someone keeps pressuring you is not freely given consent. R is for reversible. Consent can be withdrawn at any time, even if someone initially said yes. People have the right to change their mind, and the decision should always be respected. For instance, if you're halfway through some type of situation and someone says, I'm not comfortable with this anymore, the situation should stop. It doesn't matter what the other person's expectation was of the situation. I is for informed. Consent requires that everyone fully understands what they're agreeing to. If someone is misled, lied to, or doesn't have all the information, they can't give informed consent. For example, agreeing to meet up under the impression it's a study session when it's actually a date is not informed consent. E is for enthusiastic. Consent should come with a genuine, excited yes, not hesitation or reluctance. It's about wanting to participate, not feeling obligated or unsure. Enthusiastic consent often looks like positive verbal affirmations like I'd love to or it sounds great. If you're unsure if someone is giving enthusiastic consent, maybe check their body language. That can tell a lot about how people are feeling. If someone is saying yes, but their body language is saying they're scared or uncomfortable, it's probably not an enthusiastic yes. Lastly, S is for specific. Agreeing to one thing does not mean agreeing to everything. Consent is specific to the situation and the activity. For instance, saying yes to a hug doesn't mean saying yes to a kiss. Saying yes to a hug today doesn't mean saying yes to a hug tomorrow. You need to get consent for every activity and at every instance. Why is consent so important? It's about respect. It's about autonomy. It allows all parties to feel safe and ensure that everyone's boundaries are honored and respected. When you prioritize consent, you show that you value the other person and their feelings and their choices. You build trust. You promote clear communication. You help to create a culture that rejects coercion, manipulation, and violence. And I understand. Here's the thing. Some people feel awkward about asking for consent, especially in a romantic or sexual context, because they think maybe it'll ruin the mood or make things awkward. But asking for consent doesn't have to be awkward. It can actually enhance your intimacy. Phrases like, are you okay with this? Would you like to try this? Show care. They show respect. Plus, being clear about what you want, it can make the experience more enjoyable for everyone. Let's work together to make asking for consent and respecting the answer a normal, everyday part of life. After all, practicing consent isn't just about avoiding harm, it's about having healthier, happier relationships. Now that we've explored consent and the FRIES framework, let's put this knowledge into action. Please pause the lecture and complete the next practice activity. This activity is designed to help you think about how you can apply consent in real-life scenarios and reinforces the FRIES principle. When you're ready, come back to continue the lecture and we'll dive into our next important page. The consent activities will look something like this, with a scenario with you to decide what letter of FRIES is being disrespected here. So you've made it through the lecture, and now it's time to ask yourself the big question. Can you be a hero? Being a hero doesn't mean you have to save the world in one big grand gesture. It's in the small, meaningful choices you make every day. Standing up for someone, setting boundaries, respecting boundaries, intervening safely, or simply choosing kindness and respect. As you watch this final video, think about the kind of impact you want to make. What kind of hero will you be? After the video, don't forget to complete the quiz and the post-training survey. Your feedback helps us improve and ensure that we're providing you with the best tools to make a difference. Lastly, remember, I'm Olivia. I'm here as a part of the Victim Service Center of Central Florida, the Certified Rape Crisis Center for Orange, Osceola, and Seminole counties, where we are dedicated to supporting survivors, educating communities, and preventing violence. If you or someone you know ever needs help, we're here for you. Call 407-500-HEAL. Thank you for taking this journey with us today. Your willingness to learn, reflect, and act is already a huge step towards being the hero the world needs.